There is a collection of negative feelings that people put under the heading of mental health, but I think it's better to talk about these more descriptively and to just call them misery, because that's really what we're talking about, whether it's guilt, anxiety, depression, or anything else that's similar. So, where does misery come from? To help illustrate this, I want to tell a story about my grandfather, who he had a construction company for his entire adult life, essentially. And I had the fortune of working for him at various points over the summer or otherwise. And I was able to see the evolution of his company over time, from doing commercial and residential construction to switching to remodeling, to limiting it further to just residential, to limiting it further to just roofing, and finally his final form was to repair roofs. And one of the reasons he settled on that was he didn't have to maintain crews of workers, which was really difficult during the ups and downs. And he could do it himself, and it was a much higher profit margin. He was a very service-oriented man, and this form of his company best enabled him to deliver a lot more value than he charged for, while still making a handsome profit. And part of the reason for that was it was more than any of the other formulations. It was a way to translate his extensive experience into value for the customer. So what do I mean by that? Well, a typical job, we'd go and the people would call us because their roof was leaking. And what most of the other companies at the time would say was, guess what? You need a new roof, and it's going to cost something like, $40,000 in today's money. And he said, but if you give me $2,000, I will fix this thing up, I will stop the leak, and I'll guarantee it for the next however many years. I don't remember if it was 2 years or 5 years or whatever, that if it starts leaking again, I'll come back and I'll fix it for free. And they were always delighted. It was the easiest sale in the world, because they knew that a new roof was going to cost them tens of thousands of dollars. And for just a fraction of that, they could buy the time to save up the money and prepare for this enormous expense that they weren't expecting. So what we'd do is usually we'd go in the house, we'd see where the leak was manifesting in the house. And then most of the time we'd go up into the attic. And my grandfather had the experience to know how to trace these leaks up to the roof surface. Sometimes he could go directly onto the roof and in 5 seconds point out where this leak was. He was so effective at discovering where these leaks were actually coming from and fixing those problems that we would actually have to wait up on the roof for a half hour or more in many cases, because he knew that if he fixed their problem as quickly as he could, they would refuse to pay, even though they had already agreed to do that. It was quite comical. I thought it was the weirdest thing in the world, and I was pretty unhappy about it at the time, because we're talking about 120 degrees with 100% humidity where we were, and I was hot, and I wanted to get out of there back into the AC of the truck. And he said, no, if we go down, they'll complain and they won't pay. I said, okay, so we just waited, and then we went down. And he was right, because a couple of times they still complained. All right, so what are the lessons here? There's quite a few. This is quite a stack of lessons. First and foremost, your pain, where it's manifesting, your misery, your emotional pain, it's probably not manifesting close to its source. This is a whiz-bang surprise to people. You know, in the modern world, we're steeped in this belief, which is often false, that we have everything we need to get everything that we want. I won't go in depth into the reasons for why that is, but it is definitely the case. And no matter where it comes from, the point is that is how people feel. And you could tie this to so many things that you see in society today. But the truth is that a lot of problems, you have no clue what the solution is. You have no clue what's actually causing them. Why is that? Well, the world's a complex place, and it takes quite a bit of wisdom and experience to see these things. Fair enough, but actually, in many cases, it's simpler than that. Here is the nugget that you need to understand. When you willfully do less than your best, you actually diminish your ability to see yourself, other people, and the world around you. You will see various formulations of this idea in Scripture. I'm just trying to keep this super duper brief to get this out as early as I can. So an example of this is if you're dishonest in any way, you lose some of your ability to see whether or not you are telling the truth. If you don't live up to what you see in real time, you will absolutely forget at least some of what you've seen in the past. And I could go on and on with applications of this principle, but hopefully you get the point. It turns out that each day we're banging through life, and most people are consistently, reliably, at least a little dishonest. We see things and we refuse to change what's inside of us or what's outside of us to reflect what we're perceiving. And so we willingly hide it. We willingly turn away from light and truth in its many, many forms. And Jesus talks about this in John 3, if you want to check that out. So when we do that, what happens is we make a hole in our roof and then we walk away and we won't remember it. In many cases, we won't remember it. And as we're poking holes in the roof on a regular basis, maybe it's as frequently as daily, we are decimating this roof and we're creating all kinds of leaks that are going to show up as watermarks on the drywall. And that's the part we're paying attention to. How you feel right this minute is the part that you pay attention to. But you might not even have the capacity to remember what you did to cause this. In Joy on Purpose, there's a line and it's something like, how we feel in the moment is the result of the sum total of the choices we've made until that moment. The line is something like that. And it's true, okay? So how do you address this? Well, first and foremost, start paying attention to the things that you ignore. This can be as simple as a piece of advice that many people have shared. Clean your room. Clean your room, right? Tidy up, literally, the space that you occupy. Look around and pretend you're someone else walking in there for the first time. Have you ever gone away from your house for a few days and you come back and it smells funny? Everybody's house has a smell, but you get used to it, right? And sometimes there's something in there that's got to change because it's like, look, this stinks. We need to get this out of here. Like, you know, one kid's stinky shoes are here or something, and we got to fix this. But you don't notice if you're in it all the time. So adopt beginner's eyes or beginner's nose in that case, right? And look at your life and say, what is out of order here? Most people have trained themselves so thoroughly to ignore this that just this simple exercise can be overwhelming. So how do you cope with that, right? So let's give you some tools before we move on to some other ideas of things you can do. You have to learn to rank things by priority. You have to learn to manage lists. See, you can forget something if you're just trusting your mind to remember it, but if you write it down, as long as you don't lose that list, you've got it. It's captured. And there are all kinds of tools you can use for this today, and a lot of them are free, and they're great. You might have one on your phone. I have one on this phone that I'm using right now. It comes for free with the phone. It's an Apple, it's called Lists or something. It's great, okay? If you want to learn more about that, read or reread Joy on Purpose. There is a ton of practical information in that book for how to not be overwhelmed ever. Now, you've got a list, because as you're starting to pay attention, you're going to get flooded by these things that you've ignored up to this point. The good news is, as you start to manage that, it'll dwindle down, and you'll just find yourself adding things like maybe once or twice to 3 times a day. You add a thought, and it's like there's zero stress. It's just so convenient. It's easy. It's all taken care of. And as you'll read in Joy on Purpose, there are ways of going through this and ranking it, and it's just not that hard. Coming back to the analogy, if you know how to find leaks, it's not that hard. But getting there to the point where it's easy, it takes practice. It takes time and effort doing the thing. And it's extraordinarily valuable experience. It's worth a lot because the problems it prevents and solves are super expensive problems. Relative to those, the prevention and resolution of these things, it's the cheapest thing in the world. It's the best value you could ever have relative to the cost of the alternative. This is why Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart. He didn't mean that he was some beta chump. He meant he was totally submissive to the Father's purpose. And he is. He continues to be. Can we say the same? In so many of these problems of having misery in whatever form it is in life, it's the manifestation of things that you're not looking at, that you probably at one point had the power to resolve yourself. But regardless, at this point, you probably need outside help because maybe you've moved past the point of being able to see and put your finger on the problem. Maybe for someone else who lives with more honesty than you do, it'd be the easiest thing in the world and they can reach in and put their finger right on it. There are multiple stories from the New Testament where Jesus says to somebody that their sins are forgiven them. This caused quite a stir in his time because no one there believed that he had the power to forgive sin. And so in one of these notable stories, the people are murmuring. Of course, he knew what they were thinking. And he said, oh, you doubt I can do this? Well, I'll heal this guy. And then I can prove that the forgiveness of sins, which you can't see whether that actually happens or not, I can prove to you that I have power to do this. We think of this, rightly so, as this miraculous power, which is good, but there's a component of it that's anything but miraculous. What do I mean by this? Well, sometimes the guilt that we feel is as a result of sins that we've already repented of. Sometimes we're too hard on ourselves. And in that case, the role of a servant of God, you could correctly say a priest, is to come help you understand that you've repented of this sin. And if that person has enough credibility, they can help you have the faith that you lack to believe God's promises of the conditions of forgiveness. And that can obliterate this residual guilt in cases where you shouldn't be feeling it anymore. If you've forsaken a sin, that's God's condition, and you've been forgiven. You're good to go. Although you can't do that one at a time, but just for the sake of correctness there, I don't want to mislead you with that. But if you've forsaken your sins, you're forgiven. And if you haven't, you're not. And that's the flip side of this. You can say, I don't understand why my drywall keeps getting water stains on it. I mean, I keep repainting it and the stains just keep coming. You're not addressing the actual problem. You say, like, I'm working on this one thing and I feel like I just have more willpower and I'm going at it, but I still feel all this misery in my life. And sometimes I backtrack and I fall short in that thing that I've been trying to work on. It's because you're not actually repenting. The big picture is, learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart. To have a broken heart and a contrite spirit, it means that you actually have put God at a higher priority than yourself in all things. And we think of this as something only a spiritual giant, only Jesus could do that. No, we're created in his image. The fact that he did it as a man was proof that we can do it as men. and women. When the roof repair guy comes with 40 years of experience and he hops up on your roof all sprightly and fixes the problem in 5 minutes, you can make the mistake of thinking that it's some easy thing for him, but no one else could do it. If he showed you how to do it, you could do it too. He could hand you a tube of roof cement and tell you exactly what to do, and you could do it too. How do I know this? Because I was the guy who the roofing guy made do all the work. And I had no idea what I was doing. I just followed his instructions. And I didn't get all mad when he said, hey, you twit, that's not the way you do it. Do what I'm telling you, right? And so some of the time when we have stained up drywall from all these leaks and it's all mushy and falling off the walls, and now we have a mold problem too, sometimes it's because we refuse to call someone to help us. And when they show up because there's some kind of roof fixing ninja and they just kind of land on the roof somehow, unbidden, they say, yo, you know you have a problem with your roof and it's leaking. I can see it from here. You say, what do you know? You're not even in my house. How could you know it's leaking? Well, do you have a leak? It's none of your business. All right. So yes is your answer. And by the way, if I magically knew that you had a problem, maybe I have an idea about how to solve it too, right? But we have this attitude that we already know everything. We don't need help. Let me tell you something. You need help once you've done everything you can think of or what you're willing to do and you still have a problem. That's when you need help. Now, we know this in everyday life, and this is a reflection of our dishonesty. If your dishwasher breaks and you've done everything you could to fix it, you don't just pretend it's not broken. You don't just say, well, by the grace of God, my dishes will be washed. I just have to put them in there and he'll take care of the rest. You got to fix your freaking machine. And if you can't do it, you need to call someone who can. And guess what? It might cost you something, and it might not be cheap. But whatever it costs you is less than what you're going to get out of it. And that's why you call them. Right? This is every day of your life is like this. You do this every day. So what's the hang up when it comes to religious things? Things we denote as religious. It's actually very much a part of our whole life. What's the hang up? It's pride, because we can get away with this nonsense of saying these stupid ideas that you don't really believe deep down inside, which is why you don't feel good about it. Right? Because it's not outside of us. It's not the dishes not getting done. You can just put it off, or you can bury it with whatever, drugs, alcohol, having fun with friends, reading an obsessive amount of novels, like whatever it is, right? You cover it. But that hole can only be filled by God. And if you haven't figured out how to do that, maybe it's time to ask for some help. Maybe it's time to loosen up your grip on this idea that you have any clue what you're talking about, right? If the problem persists, you have not figured it out. Paul says, he talks about him having a clean conscience before God and men. This is a blessing that is available to us as disciples of Christ. And if you don't feel that, if that's not your experience day after day, if you find yourself hammered by this misery, you're doing something wrong. And it's probably something that you need help seeing. So pray to God and ask him to open your eyes. And then you open your eyes and look around you for the people that he's placed in your life and the information like this video where it's laid out to you in answer to your prayers.